Welcome to Jay's Sports Detroit Lions News Podcast on Jay's Sports YouTube page. As always, you can subscribe, like, rate, and review on any video that we have. But let's talk about today's video. Today's video is about 3 concerns that you have with the Detroit Lions. And there's not many concerns. I mean, a couple of concerns off the field in terms of, one concern is the coordinators. Obviously, replacing the coordinators at the rate you lost a defensive coordinator, you lost an offensive coordinator, but they are familiar with the system. They are familiar with the players, so that does lead into something that makes you feel a sense of relief. Today, I'm just doing a video on 3 concerns on the field that I'm going to be watching it for in training camp. Obviously, the Detroit Lions are going to start training camp a little earlier than usual because they have the Hall of Fame game. So they're going to start training camp a little earlier, and that means that the Detroit Lions will be on the field. We'll get to hear what's going on. So let's go to the first concern, because I think this is the most impactful concern in terms of what the Detroit Lions are trying to do. It's the interior of the offensive line. And I think when you look at the interior of the offensive line for the Detroit Lions, there's 2 things that need to be said. One, losing a guy like Frank Ragnow and losing a guy like Kevin Zeitler, nothing's easy about that. Nothing's easy about that. When you lose those 2 guys, those are 2 all-pros. It's very, very hard to replace those guys. And when you think about where you're going to try to replace these guys, you're going to try to replace them with rookie Tate Ratledge, or potential rookie in Miles Frazier, Christian Mahogany, Graham Glasgow, who had a really rough year last year. And with those guys, you're going to replace those 2 all-pro guys in Zeitler and Ragnow, and you're going to have to make it up on the fly. Now, I have confidence that this is going to work out because Hank Fraley is a damn good offensive line coach. Hank Fraley is one of the best offensive line coaches in the NFL, in my opinion. And when you got a good offensive line coach, it's kind of like the Patriots when they had Dante Scarnecchia. You know, when you have a good offensive line coach, you really don't really worry much about, the offensive line, because I've literally seen it. Coyote Oshika comes into play on a Thanksgiving Day game against the Buffalo Bills, has to go up against Ed Oliver, Ed Oliver's a beast. Oshika was an undrafted free agent coming into that game on a short week, and he was coached up and he did a damn good job in that game. But let's not minimize the factor that the Detroit Lions do have an issue in the interior offensive line. This is something that I think a lot of people are going to be watching as we go through the rest of training camp into the preseason, because we're going to try to figure out who could potentially be the left guard, the right guard, center. And whoever comes up on top, I think Christian Mahogany is going to come up on top. I think he's going to do a damn good job. But at the same time, I think that if you are the Detroit Lions, this has to be a major concern, because interior pressure up the middle, a guy like Jared Goff, it doesn't really bode well for any quarterback. A lot of people are going to make the case that, like, oh, Jared Goff, he can't run, he can't do this. Most of the pressure that comes up the middle, it usually doesn't bode well for any quarterback. We've seen it with Jalen Hurts for a while. We've seen it, the year prior. We've seen it with Mahomes. We've seen anywhere you go, there's going to be good defensive linemen that are come up the middle, and when they can collapse the pocket up the middle, you got to go right or left, and those defensive ends are playing contained, and that's how they're going to play Detroit, and that's going to be an interesting thing to look at. But I have full faith in Hank Fraley. I think he's going to do a good job. I think the Detroit Lions will be fine. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. Second is the defensive line. When you think about it like this, you're getting Hutchinson back. We don't know how, we don't know how he will come back. Obviously, we think that he's going to come back and he's going to do a damn good job. But you don't know how he's going to come back off an injury, And so when you look at Aiden Hutchinson, he's a damn good player. One of the best. ESPN ranked him the 7th best defensive end, which I thought was a little low. But he was coming off an injury. But he's an elite player. And when you talk about a guy like Aiden Hutchinson, You talk about a guy like Marcus Davenport, who is totally unproven to be healthy because he can't stay healthy. You got DJ Reader in the middle, and then you have a combination of Roy Lopez, Tyleek Williams, and then you're trying to podge it together until you get to Thanksgiving when Alim McNeill can come back. I don't really think people realize how big of a issue this could be, especially with Alim McNeill being a guy he's been one of the most underrated players on this roster. One of the most underrated players on this roster has been Alim McNeill. He's probably one of the most underrated players in the NFL, in my opinion, especially as a defensive tackle. What he's been able to do and how he's been able to do it. The positive side to Alim McNeill coming back into Thanksgiving is that you can figure out who you have at defensive line, okay? Because if Tyleek Williams shows out, you got him and Alim McNeill and DJ Reader and Roy Lopez. Roy Lopez, he seems like he can be a damn good player. Watching some of his film from the Cardinals, I think he could really show out here, but it's going to be interesting to see what can happen. And you're looking for a guy who can step forward on the other edge, you know? Marcus Davenport hasn't showed to be healthy. He hasn't showed to stay healthy at any point. So who's going to take that spot? I mean, I still think Mekhi Wingo could be a underrated play right there. Josh Pascal this is probably his last shot. And I do think they will sign Zadarius Smith at some point before the season, but still, defensive line is such an issue for this Detroit Lions team that you really can't go on and say that this isn't an issue, because you have one of the best back safeties in the football. Brian Branch was ranked number 2. Kirby Joseph was ranked number 5. Your corners are pretty damn good. Your linebackers are really good. The defensive line is just the issue. And if you can get pressure up the middle, if you can get pressure on the quarterback, Hutchinson comes back and he's doing a damn good job, it'll work out fine. But we'll see if they need reinforcements at some point, because missing Alim McNeill will be an issue going through probably 8 to 10 weeks of the season, and then you're going to get him back. So you could look at it like this, that it could be like a potential trade deadline acquisition where you're going to get Alim McNeill back for the stretch run. That would be great. But still, issue is with the defensive line. Now, the last one that I'm going to get to is the backup quarterback. And I think a lot of people don't understand that the backup quarterback is an issue for me, because when you think about it like this, if you watch the quarterback series on Netflix, there was a spot where Jared Goff hurt his ankle. It limited his mobility. Who is to say that that doesn't happen again? And even worse. And you don't want to sit here and you don't want to say, oh my God, like don't jinx us like that. Well, here was the stats for Alan Hooker. I gave him a score of 1 out of 5. You had last year Hooker and Allen. I mean, they didn't start. No 4 games played between the two. 6 for 10, 7 for 10 on completions and attempts. But you look at it, there's not much there. There's really not much there. And, I'm looking for Hendon Hooker to take a step up. I think this is a big spot for him because I've watched him at Tennessee. I know there's some issues in his game, but there is no way in hell that he could lose his spot to Kyle Allen. It just again, it would be a total disappointment if Hendon Hooker doesn't take that second string spot. And I would feel a lot more better about the situation if he goes into the preseason, he shows out, and he shows that he could read defenses. He can show that he can make some crisp throws. We know that he's agile. We know that he can extend plays, but we don't know how he can make those silky throws. And that's what matters in football. For all talk about, the scrambling quarterbacks, all that jazz, what matters is throwing the football. And if Jared Goff was to go down for 3 or 4 or 5 games, do you feel comfortable with a guy like Hendon Hooker? Do you feel comfortable with a guy like Kyle Allen? It'll be interesting. I think preseason is going to be so great for these two guys. You got 4 games, and this is probably the biggest 4 games for these guys. It's probably the biggest 4 games for the Detroit Lions in terms of their backup quarterback situation, because we could sit here all day long and we can dismiss the backup quarterback, but the reality in the NFL is that when you take a guy and he needs to go out there, he needs to play for the starter 2-4 games. Do you trust either one of these guys to win you 2 or 4 games? Do you trust them to win 1 or 2 games? It's an interesting dynamic. And when I did the quarterback rankings, I gave Detroit a 14. I gave Goff a 12. I gave Hooker and Allen a 1. Where 14 was, was barely a top 12. But you know what you have in Jared Goff. You know what you have, in him. But the backup situation is definitely an issue. And we'll see what happens moving forward. We'll see what happens with this team and how they go about. But there's definitely some concerns. Next video, we'll do 3 positives for the Detroit Lions moving into the season. And we're just trying to do our little training camp coverage before we get to the NFL season. We'll do a podcast next week about the Detroit Lions, and we'll do that live. So if you're new to the channel, subscribe, rate, review, comment. I appreciate everything of it. Like, subscribe, like it says on the screen. We will talk to you in the next video as we talk more Detroit Lions football here on JC.